The fighting in West Asia has intensified after a nearly week-long pause. The U.S. military completed its latest wave of strikes against Iran after Tehran targeted American bases in Jordan. But despite the flare-up in fighting, mediators claim that negotiations are still ongoing. The U.S. Central Command said that the attacks were in response to attempted Iranian attacks on U.S. forces, which were based in West Asia. The U.S. strikes came after Iran confirmed that it had fired ballistic missiles at U.S. troops in Jordan. CENTCOM said that all of the missiles were intercepted. U.S. bases in Jordan have become primary Iranian targets. Iranian media reported strikes around Qeshm and the Abadan city. Areas around these several cities in Khuzestan province, including Abadan, were struck. Iranian state media releases footage claiming to show people clearing rubble and searching for victims at a residential building in Qeshm Island after U.S. carried out fresh strikes in Iran. Hours after the U.S. strikes, Jordan's military said that its air defenses shot down 5 missiles, which were coming from Iran, that targeted the kingdom's territory. The strikes and counter-strikes are part of a familiar playbook. Washington ramps up military strikes, while Tehran retaliates against American assets and regional allies. Meanwhile, periodic military stand-downs, such as recent temporary halts in bombing campaigns, they are enacted by leadership to give diplomacy some space through mediators. Even on Thursday, as hostilities resumed, mediator Pakistan confirmed that negotiations between the United States and Iran were ongoing. Analysts believe that each side is using attacks and defensive maneuvers to show strength, believing that battlefield momentum or successful defense can bring better terms at the negotiating table. U.S. uses strikes to force concessions from Iran, while Tehran must retaliate to show that it still has enough military prowess, which is left to force its demands. Iran has also tightened its grip on global energy shipping, using Houthi forces to choke off key maritime routes in the Bab el-Mandeb. It is also holding on its biggest leverage, which is the control of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, remember, on Thursday, Iran's Revolutionary Guard said that 2 oil tankers attempting to transit the strait with U.S. support, they turned back after one of them caught fire. Iran has kept control of the Hormuz since the outbreak of the war. And to discuss this in greater detail from Tel Aviv, we are now being joined by Professor Chuck Freilich, former Deputy National Security Advisor of Israel and Professor at Columbia University. Thank you so much, Professor Freilich, for joining us on the broadcast. Now, the fighting in West Asia, it has intensified after this week-long pause. And it's not the first time that it has happened. There have been multiple intermittent bouts of escalation with neither side showing any signs of backing down. What do you think is happening here, and what is the impetus? Are Iran and the U.S. fighting simply to show strength, or perhaps for a better negotiating position at the table, according to you?
Well, I think until the last few days, this really was an attempt by both sides to improve their negotiating positions. But I think we've seen a change in Iranian behavior. They are striking out at pretty much every country in the region, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait. They've even attacked Qatar, the country which is leading the negotiations. The Iranians are trying to take what they believe is a victory in the war and to turn it into a vehicle for regional domination. And the countries in the region are quite concerned. I mean, they are trying to make nice to the Iranians. I think we have to be very, very concerned by this, because if Iran can allow itself to behave as extremely aggressively as it is today, imagine how it may allow itself to behave if and when it goes nuclear.
Professor Freilich, we've already seen the situation spiral into a much wider conflict. And in the latest, as you also mentioned, Saudi Arabia has joined in and struck Iranian proxies in Iraq, and after months of resisting, being pulled into the conflict. But having said that, do you think that this tit-for-tat strike, this will blow into an even wider war going forward?
Well, it may. There's certainly that possibility, and we've seen the growing audacity of Iranian attacks in recent days. I don't believe that diplomacy has a great deal of chances for success here. The differences between the U.S. and Iran are so deep that it's hard to imagine that an agreement can be reached. I would qualify that. Back in June, I think that Trump signed a interim deal, a ceasefire deal. It was basically an American capitulation. Unless he's willing, excuse me, unless he's willing to do that again, I don't see that they can overcome their differences. And the Iranians are deeply emboldened. They look at the American position so far, and the fact that Trump is clearly unwilling, or no, that's the wrong word, reluctant to use force. He clearly wants to end the war as quickly as possible. So the Iranians feel that they can play tough here, and I don't see them making concessions. And in the end, there's a limit to what Trump can do, because he also can't afford to appear weak. So the chances for diplomacy are quite limited. Maybe the most likely outcome is that there won't be a deal at all. We'll see ongoing, if you want to call it tit for tat, ongoing limited attacks. This could go on for quite a while. And yes, there is the possibility of it becoming a wider regional war.
Mm-hmm. And just to probe that a bit further, President Trump has promised retribution after the U.S. military. It intercepted this surprise attack by Iran, and telling reporters that it's now their time to hit them. And analysts believe that each side is using these attacks and defensive maneuvers to show strength, believing that both of them have the upper hand in the conflict. And they have been acting like that. But from what you are picking up, are there any signs suggesting that there could be some concessions which could be made that could bring back diplomacy, and it might still be able to bring about a breakthrough, which the previous talks have failed to do so far?
Look, we all prefer a diplomatic outcome, certainly to a military one. I think actually the primary source of leverage that the U.S. has and should be using now is it should state quite clearly to the Iranians that the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed indefinitely to Iranian shipping. The U.S. will try to open it for everyone else, but that it will remain closed indefinitely for Iran, because within a relatively short period, I don't know if that is weeks or a few months, but that's the approximate timetable, the Iranian economy will totally collapse in that situation. Iran is so dependent on its oil exports through the Gulf. Military action may be necessary. Iran cannot be allowed to win this war. I know that in the short term that may entail pain for regional states. It may certainly entail pain for the international economy. And no one wants to pay higher prices for oil, and certainly India doesn't wish to do so. But I think we all may have to pay a price for a while, because if Iran emerges victorious, it becomes the regional hegemon. And it is an aggressive state. It is a state which is ruled by an extreme theocratic government, an expansionist government, and it cannot be allowed to win. It would be nice if it could be removed from power.
Right, and while we are witnessing very little restraint from US or Iran, and this is both in terms of the rhetoric that they are employing, but also in the actions that we're seeing on the battlefield. But the restraint that we are seeing is coming from Israel. How do you think Israel can realistically sit this one out? And we know that Benjamin Netanyahu has recently had a very constructive meeting with Donald Trump. Do you think the strategic calculus is going to change anytime soon?
Well, I think unlike the situation on February 28th, where a joint war was launched by the U.S. and Israel, and surprisingly, given Israel's much smaller size, it actually constituted basically an equal partner in that war. This time, President Trump seems to want to go it alone without Israel. That could change. I would imagine that CENTCOM would like Israeli involvement. But so far, the president seems to be convinced that he doesn't want that to happen. It could change very quickly if Iran strikes out at Israel. And Iran also, remember, it speaks continually about Israel's destruction, about their role in Israel's destruction. And so Israel can't afford to allow Iran to emerge from this war victorious. Certainly it cannot allow it to decide to go nuclear. And if and when Israel has information that they really are breaking out or making significant progress towards completing the nuclear program, regardless of American preferences, Israel will have to take military action.
Right, of course, we'll have to wait and see how the situation develops from here on, Professor Freilich. But for now, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast and sharing your perspective with us.
Thank you.